Welcome everyone to the World Affairs Council of Great Decisions event on NATO. I'm Julie Muller. I'm chair of the programming committee and board member for the World Affairs Council. And I don't think we could be having this event at a more timely time, more propitious time to be discussing NATO and our relationship with Europe. I want to thank a few of our sponsors before we get started. First, our host, Bernstein Shore, thank you very much. Our global benefactor, Coffee by Design, Bill and Nancy Hall, Roger Woodman Jr., Jim Landau, and Janet Edmondson. And welcome to our new members, and thank you to our current members. We'd like to say a special welcome to the students from Gould Academy who are here with us tonight. We're glad to have you here. If anyone needs the restroom during our event, they are just to the right outside the door here down that little hallway. I'd like to introduce our moderator for tonight, who will then take things over and introduce our guests. Our moderator is Sarah Dawn Petrin, who is a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security. She's an author, humanitarian, and peace and security advisor with over 20 years of experience in the humanitarian sector. Petrin has served as a peace operations and human security analyst with the U.S. Army Peacekeeping and Stability Operations Institute, and as a senior civilian advisor to NATO on the protection of civilians. She has extensive experience in complex emergencies, having led teams and advised UN agencies, the International Committee for the Red Cross, and NGOs in over 20 countries. Petrin holds a master's degree in forced migration from Oxford University and has authored numerous publications on human security, women in peacekeeping, and global refugee crises. I'll turn it over now to you, Sarah.
Thank you so much. It's really wonderful to see all of you here this evening, and we are at a moment in time where we need to be discussing these important issues. And I'm just thrilled that we have two amazing speakers with us this evening. I'm going to share some of their backgrounds. First, joining us virtually from the Florida World Affairs Council and as an advisory board member for Maine is Admiral Gregory Johnson. Welcome, Admiral Johnson. We're thrilled to see you. Admiral Johnson is a graduate of the University of Maine, and he began his distinguished naval career in 1969 and was designated a naval aviator just a year later. Over the next 36 years, he rose through the ranks and became a four-star admiral, commanding U.S. naval forces in Europe and allied forces in Southern Europe, particularly during NATO's operations in the Balkans, overseeing peace support operations in Bosnia and Herzegovina as well as Kosovo. His tenure included significant responsibilities, including leading the U.S. Sixth Fleet and serving as a senior military assistant to the Secretary and Deputy Secretary of Defense. He has a Distinguished Service Medal and a Navy Distinguished Service Medal, and after retiring in 2004, he founded Snow Ridge Associates, where he provides strategic advice and counsel. We're just thrilled to have you with us this evening, Admiral Johnson. Thank you for being here. And yeah, thank you. And also with us, and thank you for coming in person from Boston, is Dr. Sonja Kreibigh, who is with the Council General of Germany to the New England states. She has served as Consul General since July of 2022, and she's been deeply involved in African affairs, heading the Division for Pan-African Issues, Southern Africa, and the Great Lakes at Germany's Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Berlin, which gave her a unique perspective about the role of Europe beyond its borders. But that's not all. Dr. Kreibigh has been at the forefront of Europe's pressing challenges, including serving as the head of the Migration Policy Unit from 2014
Recording in progress.
to 2018, leading discussions about the impact of migration on European security, and we're very much looking forward to your insights on that topic. Her diplomatic career has taken her from the halls of the UN in New York to the German embassy in Bucharest, Romania, and serving as a press spokesperson for the Foreign Office Speaker's Office in the early 2000s. Her academic background is also very impressive. She studied law at the University of Bonn and the University of Edinburgh, eventually earning her doctorate in law from Bonn. Very impressive. With such a wealth of experience in diplomacy and European affairs, we're looking forward to her valuable insights about the future of NATO and EU security at this time. Thank you for being here. We're going to dive into several questions, but we're going to make sure to save adequate time for Q&A so we can have a good discussion with you. So please be thinking of things you also think we should cover. And I'm going to turn first to Admiral Johnson for this question. You know, right now we're seeing a lot of uncertainty around the U.S. commitment to Ukraine and how this is causing European leaders to reorganize their thoughts and strategies for collective defense. Do you think that the EU will need additional military capabilities, and what should those capabilities be? Should NATO be seen as a less effective or viable coalition? Just an easy one.
Yeah, well, I certainly agree with the uncertainty. It's not only Europe that has uncertainty. I think a lot of us here in America have a great deal of uncertainty because I really don't know what the overarching strategy is. I'm hopeful that NATO survives, and it does need to reestablish itself as a deterrent force. I think that collectively, I say we, certainly since the end of the Cold War, the deterrent dominance that the United States created coming out of the end of World War II and continued through the Cold War has slowly evaporated and gone away. In some ways, we've been feckless, we've been engaged in wishful thinking, and we just haven't paid attention. And we withdrew most of our forces from Europe, which was a credible force. It wasn't just a tripwire force, it was a force that could do something to deter. And Putin has been watching us, and slowly but surely, in 2007, he told us what he was going to do. I don't think we believed him then. And in 2008, he invaded Georgia. He'd already gone into Moldova. That was in the 90s. And since then, he's just continued to escalate. Well, we have done things that have caused him to believe that we really aren't serious about deterrence and that we will not seriously challenge him. And so here we are. So to build back a deterrent force that's credible and it will deter the likes of Mr. Putin and fellow travelers, it's going to take an awful lot, not only by the Europeans, but I think also for us. And I would hope that NATO is still the primary force for developing, or the institution for developing that deterrent force. It's been around for 76 years now, and it's got the organization and the traditions and the wherewithal to do this, but it just needs to have a much more credible force. Another important reason why that is UK is part of NATO. UK is not part of the EU. And so for those reasons, and of course the hope that the United States stays fully engaged in NATO, I think it's very important that we get serious about reconstituting NATO as a credible deterrent force as it was from 1949 till certainly the end of the Cold War.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I'll turn now to Dr. Kreibigh. Given the evolution of NATO since its founding in 1949, what do you see as the alliance's most important achievements, and how has Germany's role within the alliance changed over time?
Well, thank you. I need to speak into this, sorry. I'm so used to having handheld microphones. First of all, thank you again for having me here. We're at a very complicated moment in world politics. It's also been a bit complicated to prepare for today's event because so the world has been changing on a very daily basis, and I'm trying to keep abreast of it. As to your question, so for Germany, NATO still is the core pillar of our collective security. And we remain fully committed to NATO. We see that there are a number of challenges right now, but we will do anything we can to sort of keep that alliance relevant. Germany has massively benefited from NATO. We joined in 1955. Our role within NATO has also evolved over time. The Admiral may remember we had this very heated debate in Germany in the 90s about out-of-area deployments of our military, particularly in the Balkans. That was a decisive moment also for German domestic policy in sort of defining what our role is, particularly after reunification and after the end of the Cold War. We currently have a war, so war has returned to Europe. It has returned as a result of Russia's attack on Ukraine. That has not only been the attack on the independence and sovereignty of a country that is close to Europe, that has expressed its wish to more closely align itself with Europe, that shares our values, shares our belief in democracy. So this attack is not only an attack on Ukraine, but it's also an attack on Germany and on Europe and our collective security. So NATO, I'll leave it at that for the moment.
Yes, thank you for that. Yeah, Admiral.
Well, first of all, I'd like to shout out the great contributions that Germany has made to NATO and the effectiveness of NATO over the years. They were host to several 100,000 NATO troops all during the Cold War, shared in the expense of that in many important ways. And then I remember my days on the Joint Staff and subsequently in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. I had the pleasure of working with General Klaus Neumann, and he was the head of German military forces from 1991 to 1996, and then he was chairman of the NATO Military Committee from 96 to 99, and he worked diligently with the political people in Germany to encourage the more active participation of German forces, and that began in the Balkans and some of the peace operations there that I had the opportunity to command in Bosnia-Herzegovina and in Kosovo, and of course they participated in Afghanistan and in a major and significant way. So they've come a long way, and they are critical, I would say, to whatever happens to the future of NATO. They're the largest nation in Europe, they're the largest economy, and their military capability will be critical to whatever happens with NATO in the future. I also do hope that the expansion of European capacity, as I mentioned earlier, comes through the NATO institution, and that the EU stays more engaged on the economic side. And otherwise, I think bifurcating it, and then we end up having splitting resources and attention and what have you. So I think it's important that NATO stays strong, with or without the United States participation at the level that it has been in the past, or whatever is in the future. There are big questions in terms of the nuclear deterrent if the United States should withdraw. And of course, that just leaves France as the only EU nation with nuclear weapons, in the United Kingdom as a NATO member, as well as France. So these are huge issues, and hopefully we can work through them in positive and constructive ways. And I do think that we needed a wake-up call, and this has certainly given us a wake-up call.
Yes, thank you for that. I just want to see if you want to comment on that, the distinction between the NATO's role and the EU's role. Of course, this issue with Ukraine has brought up a lot of discussion around a new defense mechanism existing within the EU. And Admiral Johnson indicated it might be better for the EU to play an economic role rather than trying to take on new defense capabilities or borrow those capabilities from existing NATO mechanisms. Did you want to share your thoughts on that?
I can do that. Well, the recognition that European states have to do more, of course, security also to play a more active role within NATO is not new. It's a process that has been going on for a while, and the Russia's attack on Ukraine was the first wake-up call that we had. So that was 3 years ago. In Germany back then, our Chancellor, still Chancellor Olaf Scholz, delivered a major speech in Parliament and spoke about our renewed and strengthened commitment towards doing more for our own security within the framework of NATO. We call this the Zeitenwende, like a tidal shift in our foreign policy and security policy. So there is, all European states are determined to do more for their own security within NATO, building sort of a stronger European pillar within NATO, and sort of complementing capabilities both in Europe and in the US. Of course, if you look a bit more closely at the security architecture in Europe, it gets a bit more complicated because there are also sort of security and military pillars within the European Union that are more sort of supportive, also helping to build a more efficient and a stronger defense industry in Europe, for example. There are some members of NATO, like as the UK and of course the US and Canada, that are not members of the EU. So it's a bit complicated, but in theory the idea is that both pillars complement each other, and it's clearly in the interest of everybody to strengthen also European commitment under the framework of NATO. So of course over the last days we've seen very significant differences in opinion on where this should go and what security for Europe actually means. Of course, the catalyst for that was how to come to a just and lasting peace in Ukraine. Everybody in Europe, and I think the Ukrainians most of all, wish for peace. So everybody is committed towards finding a peace, but I think there are currently some disagreements on how we get there and how this peace could actually look like. For Germany, it's essential that in order to get to a fair and lasting peace, we need to support Ukraine, also to bring Ukraine in a position of strength in these negotiations that have to start. Ukraine's ability to defend itself must be at the heart of any future peace order, because what we cannot see is a peace that does not recognize Ukraine's sovereignty and independence. And so Ukraine, even after peace is being formed, Ukraine must be able to defend itself, also to make sure that there is no backsliding from any peace agreement. And then, of course, we saw that in order to safeguard such a peace, there must be European states must bring more to the table. And this is what I just said. We are determined to do more for our own security, and we've also seen some really interesting developments in domestic German politics. You may all know that Germany just recently had elections, and so now there are two parties talking about a future coalition agreement. These talks have just started, but yesterday the leaders of the two parties that are most likely going to enter into a coalition agreement came to a very early agreement on massively expanding Germany's fiscal space for security. And if for those of you who are more familiar with German politics, a disagreement on how we finance the the increased defense obligations that we have, how we finance that within the framework of German fiscal policy. There was a disagreement in the previous coalition, and this is why the coalition fell apart. So now we have the two parties that are most likely to form the next government, and they came to this agreement. And they're going to present this proposal to Parliament probably next week. They will need another party to form a majority for that, because this requires a 2/3 majority, and will also require an amendment to our constitution. But if they manage to pull this off, this is a very stark deviation from previous policies that Germans are famous for austerity, and we've always tried to be fiscally very responsible. We also saw our level of, we only have like our level of indebtedness is only 63% of our GDP. This is very low, so we actually have some space to expand. But just yesterday they decided that all necessary defense expenditure that surpasses 1% of national GDP will be exempt from the limitations imposed by our constitutionally enshrined debt brake. That means we will have, suddenly we will have a large flexibility to increase our defense spending. And our probably future chancellor also said that in light of the threats to freedom and peace on our continent, whatever it takes must now also apply to our defense. So as I said, this is sort of in the political process right now, but if this, if they manage to bring this to a conclusion, that will make things much easier for Germany, also with all our commitments that all our future commitments towards improving our own defense and towards supporting Ukraine.
Yeah, thank you for that update. It's important to
Just
remember
like to
that.
add
Yeah.
one thing, the complementarity between the EU and NATO is very important, and thank you for bringing that up. And just like in the United States, the industrial base for building the armaments that we need and the capabilities that we need has atrophied considerably in Europe, and as it has in the United States. And so I think that this is a huge area that's going to need a lot of attention, and I'm hopeful that the EU would look, as it already has indicated, looks very favorably upon that, and will work. And I don't think you need to have consolidation, but you need to have cooperation among a pretty spread out industrial base, spread out over many, many different countries. And of course, everybody wants their industries to thrive. But I'll leave it to the Europeans how to do that. But I'm very encouraged by the interest that's shown there, and it will take a unifying force like the EU to bring this to fruition.
Yeah, thank you for that. I did want to ask you, Admiral Johnson, to just make any comments that you'd like to share about the lessons that NATO is learning from the situation in Ukraine. There's been a lot said and written about this already, but given the shift in U.S. policy, what do you think NATO's role might be in the future of peace?
Well, I think it's going to be increasingly important, and I hope it's going to be increasingly important and effective because the United States is part of it. If the United States isn't part of it anymore, then it becomes absolutely critical for Europe to step up, because I do believe that Russia is not a benign force. We have failed in our ability to deter them. We've lost deterrence dominance in the Eurasian continent, and it's going to take a lot to reestablish that. So there's going to be plenty for NATO to do, and it needs to be a very credible force. And it's very hard to reestablish deterrence dominance if you've lost it. And so it's going to take some time. But I also think that Russia doesn't hold all the cards. It has lots of challenges. You know, some people can say that this whole affair in Ukraine has been a failure. From the initial attack, it was clear that their intention was to take all of Ukraine, and they failed in that. And they are, want to be seen as a world's great power. And for 3 years, Ukraine has held them off, with a lot of help, of course, from us. But, we've dribbled it in. We haven't given them critical mass when we particularly had the opportunity in late 2022 and early 2023. And so we bear some responsibility, but the reality is they haven't made much progress in 3 years going against Ukraine. So I don't know what that tells you about Russia, but I think it is not a bear that stands 10 feet tall. It may be a cub more than a bear. And so we're still going to have to reestablish some kind of a deterrent capacity better than we have had in the past. And I would also add about exercises, much more in the area of exercises like the old reforger exercises that we used to do once a year in the 80s. And with hundreds of thousands of forces moving, we'd activate all the reserve merchant fleet, would move stuff from the United States to Europe. And by the way, we also ended those exercises with some kind of a nuclear phase on it as part of our deterrent capacity effort. And it was successful in the Cold War, and we need to rebuild that.
Yeah, thank you for that. We've talked a bit about Russia, but let's shift to another area of strategic competition for the U.S. and for Europe, which is the role of China. And Dr. Kreibigh, I know that certainly the role of China is of interest to you. And how do you think that this impacts NATO's role in forming a more credible deterrent strategy?
Okay, maybe before I directly answer your question, let me just add an aspect, because you mentioned that when you refer to my bio, that I've also worked with Africa policy, and in that role we've taken a very close look at China's engagement in Africa, and we've seen this as an area of concern, because we saw how impactfully China is engaging with countries on the African continent through trade policy, through development policy, also with a lot of soft power. Never underestimate the role of soft power. So we've worked very intensively on coming up with own strategies, but sort of in the framework of NATO, Africa is of course not as important. It's for Europe, so in the bigger picture, of course, the U.S. is much more pivoted, has much more pivoted towards China than Europe. So for us, security challenges on the European continent are still closer and a priority. But in 22 at the then NATO summit, a new NATO strategic concept, it was for the first time also recognized that China, with its ambitions and policies, challenges NATO's interests, securities, and values. And we can talk about many areas, particularly also in technology, where Chinese is, the accent of China is challenging the security interests of all of NATO's members. So Germany has made its own steps towards living up to this challenge as well, even though, as I mentioned, our priorities have been on the European continent and also in supporting Ukraine. Germany has increased its presence in the Indo-Pacific. We've sent some of our naval ships to the Indo-Pacific. We've entered into security agreements with military and have ramped up military cooperations with countries in the Indo-Pacific region with which we share values and common interests, such as Australia, Japan. And we also, the German Foreign Office has Indo-Pacific guidelines. They date back to 2020, so everybody knows we have to update them. This is something that will be on the task list for the next government, I'm quite sure. Just to also mention, because we spoke a lot about Russia, if you look at what's happening in Ukraine, well, there clearly is strong cooperation between Russia and China. Russia would not have been able to maintain its position in Ukraine without the support by China. So I think this also very clearly explains why both countries are an issue to us.
Yeah, thank you so much. Admiral Johnson, do you want to share any of your thoughts about the rise of China and?
Yes, well, it's obviously a significant force. This weekend, or last weekend, I guess it was, the Camden Conference took place, and the topic was threat to democracy, which is a pretty timely topic. And one of the speakers was a gentleman, Professor Dr. Al Brands, from Johns Hopkins, and he's just written a book called he's written several books, but the most recent one is The Eurasian Century. And I just finished reading it. It brought me back to my war college days and my strategy course, studying about Mackinder and Mahan and land powers versus sea powers and what have you. But the fact of the matter is, this was about the 20th century. 3 major wars, World War I, World War II, and the Cold War, were fought over who was going to control the Eurasian landmass. And now you have an alignment of force between Russia and China. And they have lots of differences probably, but they have one abiding thing that they completely agree on. And that is the fact that they want to diminish the role of the United States and of NATO, for that matter, in the world, take away the dollar as the denomination for most international economic transactions and what have you. They're in full agreement on this, and they're pretty determined. So I guess the 21st century is also going to be the century of Eurasia, and it's going to be up to what are called the perimeter forces, Western Europe, Japan, Korea, the Philippines, all the way around to Vietnam, Singapore, and our allies there, to contain the forces in the Eurasian landmass. And so I think that we can't do any of this alone. We need allies. We need political and diplomatic capital built up as much as we can, both with our friends in Western Europe. Now I'm speaking from a U.S. standpoint, but also with our friends in the Pacific. And so I think these are tied together inextricably, and we all need to work on this. And China is a force to be reckoned with, and it's going to intimidate all of our friends in these perimeter nations. And if we don't show that we will support them and that we'll be there for them, then they're going to have to make accommodation with China. Just like if NATO isn't strong in Europe, particularly the Eastern Europeans will have to start thinking about their own survival and what kind of accommodations they have to make. And I think that one of the greatest things that NATO's ever done is its Eastern expansion in the post-Cold War era. And those countries have been passed around and stabbed in the back so many times. I think it is a great service that NATO has done to bring them into the Western community of nations, and that it is important and it's a notable accomplishment, and we can't walk back on that, like you could say, like we did in Yalta. And you wonder with our current administration if we're going back to a great power model, and we divide the world up into spheres of influence. And I think we need to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, thank you so much. And just stepping back from looking at the relationship with competitors, how do you see the U.S. and Europe aligning on other issues? Are there foreign policy challenges that perhaps this administration and Europe can see eye to eye on? We're still learning what the Trump doctrine is exactly, but do you see some avenues for cooperation that might not be obvious?
Well, for Germany, what has remained true for the past decades will hopefully also remain true. So we always emphasize that we offer an honest partnership with the United States, to which we are fully committed, in which we are going to play our role, to which we are going to bring our interests, our role in the world. We're going to bring that to the table. This is currently being put to a test. I don't have an answer to your question right now. I see a number of other challenges that we have to deal with, trade being one of them. As an economy that is very much export driven, any limitations to free trade are a massive challenge. We believe in the value of free trade. We believe in the value of trade that is sort of rules-based and that also creates economic benefits along sort of value chains. Germany would not only be impacted by tariffs that are levied against the European Union, we are already impacted by the tariffs that are levied against Mexico and Canada because, for example, German car manufacturers are present both in the US and in Mexico. So every German car that is, I drive a Volkswagen and that is produced in Mexico, but it's been sold and probably also assembled in the US, I don't really know. But so we are already affected by these, and we can only point out to the sort of to the economic value that German investment has brought to the US. We are the third important investor worldwide to Germany. We are among the top trading partners, and of course we hope that this can remain the same.
Yeah, thank you for that. Definitely trade and tariffs are on the front page these days. Admiral Johnson, do you want to share any thoughts about economic cooperation and trade and how we can create better cooperation with Europe on non-defense challenges?
Well, I mentioned going to the War College and studying strategy in Mahan and Mackinder. I think any of the, so we were, Mahan was the holy grail for those of us in the Navy, and it was about open access to the seas and sea lines of communication, and great nations were nations that traded, and the role of the United States Navy was to have open access to the sea lines of communication for not only our interests, but the interests of the rest of the world. And a rising tide raises all boats, not just our boat. And so I'm very much in favor of open and as unencumbered trade as possible. Every country has to make some decisions on it, and how much and how harshly how much they want to support their own industries. But the fact of the matter is there's hardly anything made in the world today, any kind of product that's made fully and completely from material from one single nation. I just read an article that the ubiquitous iPhone, it has bits and pieces from 51 different nations. And we know what the car industry is like. It's several scores of nations to produce a single car, from screws to little chips to that run your windows or turn your heater on or control the temperature in your car. I find it hard to believe that we can become fortress within each one of our one in Europe, one in the United States, one in China. I don't think it's going to work. And I think the economic downturn from trying to go to that kind of a system will soon shout out and say this isn't going to work. So I'm hopeful that we'll come to some kind of agreement, and I think we'll all be better off. It'll be a much better world if we have as open markets as possible across all borders.
Great, thank you so much. We do want to open the discussion to questions from the audience soon, so please be thinking about what you would like to ask our distinguished guests. We want to have more time for that, but I might start with a question about how do you see the role of public diplomacy and groups like the World Affairs Council of Maine helping to kind of mend ties that would otherwise seem to be broken between the US and other countries at this time?
You play an extremely important role, and also public diplomacy currently is the thing that I'm doing as Germany's consul to the New England states. I'm not involved in any of the discussions that are taking place in DC. But my role is to represent Germany and also to explain our position. So I traveled to Portland yesterday, I was in Connecticut today, I was in Connecticut yesterday, and I just try to explain our positions and help people form their own opinions on the basis of a more wider perspective of positions. So I think this is a role that I, as a diplomat, have to play, but that you can also play, and it's extremely important. I'm personally very confident that the transatlantic relationship, the relationship between Germany and the US, that will survive this test and any other test that may come around the corner, because our nations have been so closely interlinked for the last decades. Germans still have this very deep feeling for the US. We all, I also always say that the last electoral campaign in the US was so much, so it was in the media in Germany, it was almost crazy. So every German was following it, and every German also had an opinion on things. So we feel very connected to your country. And there are also so many ties between our countries on all different levels, from trade and industry to research and science. I work a lot with the universities and the research environment here in New England. And I mean, scientists are traveling back and forth, and these are ties that I think they will stand any test that may come around the corner.
Thank you so much for that. It gives us hope that we can engage in this open way with you. Thank you for being here. And Admiral Johnson, do you want to share any of your thoughts about public diplomacy and the role of the World Affairs Council of Maine, and how those of us in the audience can work on improving ties when it seems like there isn't points of agreement?
Well, I certainly agree with Dr. Bishop that public diplomacy is critically important, and what the World Affairs Council of Maine does and all the World Affairs Council chapters throughout America are critically important. And getting into our schools and out to every civic organization there is, we need to preach this word. I think it's getting harder and harder for our State Department to recruit people who are interested in serving in the Foreign Service, the CIA, our armed forces, and what have you. These are all important roles of public service, and it's becoming more difficult to encourage young people to enter into those career paths. And I think educating people on how important it is in the well-being of anybody, even in the most remote corner of Maine, depends on the more open and the more prosperous our country is, because we have all our economic and military ties we do. I grew up in an environment where diplomacy was an art form that I think we were quite proud of. And we did, I think, very, very well. And you were spending your time building political and diplomatic capital all over the world, because you're going to need it. And I think that allies are fundamentally important. There's hardly any major security issue in the world today that we can solve on our own. You need as many allies as you can, both in the European theater and the Pacific theater and around the world. And so I think that this is an area that has diminished in importance. Degree students going into international relations, and the kind of deep expertise, for instance, that we had in the Soviet Union with the various Russian programs from the 60s and 70s, those have sort of declined over the years. So I think it's an emphasis that we should encourage, and we need to build back that capacity, that we should be working all the time to increase the political and diplomatic capital that we have with our allies. The only thing worse than trying to solve a security problem by yourself, I mean, working with allies, is working without them. And I guess that's a riff on Winston Churchill's line, but it's absolutely true. And there's very few problems that apply just to one country. There's always second and third order impacts that spread out across the world. And you need to have interlocutors that you've built trust with and you can have serious discussions with over time.
Yeah, thank you for that. I see Allison has the mic for questions, so when you have a question, please stand up and at least tell us your name. And we are happy to take a few questions.
There you go. Stand up and say your name. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Rebecca, and I live in South Portland. I have a question regarding NATO defense spending, and if you felt that there would be more security if the countries not meeting that 2% threshold started to do that, and if there's a reason why they aren't.
I can easily take that question because I said earlier that sort of European states have understood that they have to increase defense spending. If you look at European members of NATO altogether, sort of in average, all of them taken together, European members of NATO reach that 2% target. Some of them are still below it. Germany has reached it, but if in our most recent electoral campaign, parties were, so that was one of the key issues that were debated, and parties were committing themselves to reaching 3 to even 4, some even mentioned 5%. So there is a very clear recognition that we can't stop at 2%. And the potential agreement, the potential change in Germany's fiscal laws that I mentioned earlier guarantees that we do not have to limit ourselves in that regard. So as probably future Chancellor Merkel said, we will do whatever it takes to make sure that that we play our part in Europe's defense. There will also be a special European Council with all heads of state of European member states tomorrow in Brussels. And European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen also, I think today, time is passing, so was it yesterday or today? I don't know. Submitted proposals also that would also help European member states in expanding their fiscal space to do exactly that. So the European Commission would take on additional loan that would then be passed on to member states so that they can invest more in defense. They would also they would also create an exception from the European Stability and Growth Pact that limits public spending of European member states. So this is an issue that all EU member states are actively working on, because we have seen the events of the last days were, well, they were pretty shocking for Europe. And everybody has really woken up and realized that if it is really necessary, we will also have to be able to provide our own security, and we will have to invest massively in defense. So this is, it's been a turning point.
Thank you.
Well, I would agree. And if it was shocking for Europeans, it was, I think, also shocking for us here in the United States. And while there is a lot of uncertainty, I hope, I think we did need to have kind of an inflection point and get serious about defense spending. And we kind of were napping after the end of the Cold War for a while, for a couple of decades. And this is what it has led to. And so I think that the rise of China and the intimidation in the Western Pacific and the impact it'll have on our economies and what Russia has done with Ukraine, I think that has awakened us. And I'm fairly optimistic that we will all find ways to work together collectively, because we can't do it by ourselves, using whatever institutions that exist and maybe new forms of international organizations that can help in this manner. That I think 76 years, I think the most successful alliance in all of recorded history. has been NATO, and I think is going to be indispensable going forward.
Thank you.
I'm Peter Murray, and I'd like to ask again, and this is perhaps on the same theme, but with the past image of NATO being a organization that was to stop the westward flow of the communism and the Soviet Union, and then with the end of the Cold War, as Admiral Johnson said, went to sleep. But that was still our structure, and the idea was the Americans would provide a good amount of the heft. The Europeans would let the Americans more or less control it, and they got this kind of stereotype. Now, the weak Europeans who are spending their time making life better for their populations, and the Americans who are providing the nuclear umbrella, so to speak. And unfortunately, how do you reverse this stereotype? And so you talk about the Europeans spending more money to 2%, 3%. That's not going to do the job. The Europeans have to show the Americans that they have a very strong defense capability and a very strong economic capability before I think you're going to get the Americans back into a partnership where the Americans will give up much of their freedom of action in order to be partners with the Europeans. And so that I agree with about a matter of nostalgia, maybe a matter of a feeling of identity with the Europeans, with Admiral Johnson. It'd be great to have the framework be NATO, but it has to be a NATO in which the Europeans can say, we are doing at least as much, particularly with respect to our own turf, as the Americans are, remembering the Americans are worried about the western part of the world as well. And so I think we're talking about developing the industries of Europe. And it's very sad that this is the case. There's so much more has to be invested in arms than has been the case in the past. But I think it's a new reality. What do you think of that?
Well, I agree that we find ourselves in a new reality. I also, I'm convinced that, well, we are clearly having a job ahead of us, but I'm convinced that so we've heard the shot and we're sort of on a good path towards living up to these expectations. Issues sort of in an imbalance and also in military capabilities we won't be able to resolve that within the next year. That takes a bit of time. Also, it's the same with sort of defense spending. You can order your F-35s, but then they still have to be built. So it takes some time. Germany has also restarted a debate about military conscriptions. We suspended that in 2011. That was sort of after reunification. We realized that we may not need a standing army, and also the expectations for our military were different. They were mostly deployed in special missions abroad, so you needed some special capabilities. Our Minister of Defense already submitted first proposals of how to gradually go back to sort of military conscription. This is a discussion that is going to happen, and it will be interesting to follow. But on the other hand, I know that it doesn't change much, but the only time that Article 5 has ever been invoked was in the defense of the US. So this is also something that we sometimes remind people of.
I'm going to pull rank here because we have Maine's honorary consul from Germany, Adrian Kendall, and then I will get back to the rotation of questions. Sir, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Alison, and thank you to the World Affairs Council for hosting us, and to Admiral Johnson and Consul General Kreibigh for being here as well. I'm going to leave my honorary consul hat on for a moment because I want to address the comment just made by my esteemed colleague Peter Murray, fellow lawyer, and that is also, though, that we need to be careful of the narrative and that it is fact-driven. And going back to the address yesterday by President Trump, that the U.S. has contributed $350 billion to the defense of Ukraine, while Europe's contribution was a paltry 100, is actually false. And so there is an equivalence, and actually Europe, the EU nations and the Europe alliance has contributed more than the United States. So your point is well taken, that that is the impression, but unfortunately the impression is not accurate. So one thing you've asked, what can the World Affairs Council do? Maybe we can all make sure that facts are driving our political opinion. I did have a question, actually, probably more for Admiral Johnson. Admiral, thank you again for your service and for your continued contribution. And it goes to the question of establishing and reestablishing deterrence dominance. And you also made a point, I'm sort of latched on to the dribbling that was happening at the outset of the invasion of Ukraine and the battle for it. And that is the issue really one of resolve versus material and force projection? And then the follow-up question to that is, how do we reestablish deterrence dominance? Thank you.
Well, excellent question, and thank you. I think a lot of it is resolve and a belief that you have the political will to use the capability once you establish that capability. And like I say, that's a long and complicated process to reestablish that. Like, we came out of World War II in a remarkable position as the dominant power, and I think we were very generous in the way we went about things with both the Marshall Plan, the Truman Doctrine, what we did in Asia with our allies there, Japan and Korea. We still have forces in both of those places, and we still have some forces in Germany. We've got our destroyers based in Spain. We have bases throughout the Mediterranean. They're NATO bases, but some of them are bilateral bases as well. And so I think that I mentioned exercises. We used to do much more demanding exercises back in the days of the Cold War. I think that has to come back. We have to do them in convincing ways with very challenging scenarios. And I think we've got to talk about this a lot more. And public diplomacy and building over time where it isn't just talk. I think our talking and the fact that we are doing things concretely and can demonstrate that we are, and that we can use these forces in a pretty dramatic fashion, and the way we exercise them will slowly build it. But it is not going to be easy. It's going to take some time, and we I hate to use the word squandered, but we kind of did squander that deterrent dominance we had when we had 350,000 American troops in Germany, and we had 2 carrier battle groups deployed at all times. We had our strategic ballistic missile submarines. This is back in the 60s in the Road of Spain and Holy Lock, and we had a credible deterrent force combined with what our NATO partners have. And to build back something of that equivalence, I don't think it has to get to that level, but we're going to have to show not only raw capability, but the more important part is convincing would-be opponents that you had the political will to use it.
Okay, and as a reminder, we've got some, we want questions, and we want to get everybody in here, so quick question. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Adam Bobrow. I'm new to the World Affairs Council of Maine. My question was actually a governance question with NATO, which is, to what extent can NATO act absent consensus? And maybe to put a sharper point on it, if you see a situation like the one that we may face in the future with the U.S. president suggesting that he wants to take over territory that's currently controlled by another NATO ally in Greenland, like, is there a mechanism within NATO to resolve something like that? Is there a way that NATO has to be part of the mediation for those concerns?
Adam.
Yeah.
Thanks for becoming a new member and your interest. And that's a hard question. Well, NATO operates under a consensus agreement, and so far in critical issues, we've been able to work diplomatically, and it sometimes takes a lot of time and arm twisting and what have you on difficult issues to get to consensus. One of the good things that's happened since the 12 members came in 1949 to establish NATO is we've grown, and we're now with Finland in 2023 and Sweden in 2024, we now have 32 members. And of course, building consensus gets to be just a little bit more complicated. I do think, though, that it's possible, and I can't say for sure. I don't know for sure how we're going to go about it, but I don't think the United States is going to invade Greenland and take it away from Denmark. Whatever happens will be done diplomatically and from two sovereign states, and an agreement will be hammered out. And I don't foresee that happening, to tell you the truth. But anyway, that is a challenge. It's also part of the strength of NATO. And so I think if it's severely tested, we'll find a way to arrive at that consensus. There have been workarounds, pretty sophisticated ones, in how to do that. And we've been successful so far. And that's what I mean about building trust and having a diplomatic effort going on at all times. People think that NATO has nothing but interminable meetings, and there's an element of truth to that, I suppose. But that's the only way you can build trust. And to those who might disagree with you, you have to sit down and have discussions and start working to build some kind of consensus. Sometimes you have to put a little bit of sweetener in the coffee and provide some kind of a way to convince someone it's in their interest to do that. And that's what diplomacy is about. And I think we used to be very good at it, and I have no reason to believe we will continue to be very good at it.
My name is Bill Franks, and I wanted to ask a question about Russia. I've been reading a number of articles lately, largely written by Ukrainian economists, so they probably have an axe to grind, but pointing out that Russia may be on the verge of some sort of financial crisis. Interest rates are very high. They've been shifting workers in the civilian sector to the military sector and financing the military sector by giving loans to those industries. And there's some thought that this can't go on indefinitely. Can you comment on that, either of you?
Well, I don't have a whole lot of expertise in that, but I have read articles like you have that make that point. I just read one this afternoon. The author was making the case that he felt that Russia was in a pretty weak position, and for the reasons that you mentioned. And that was the same article that made the case that in reality, given their initial aspirations of conquering all of Ukraine as their historical buffer state, which their initial invasion, the way it was designed with 4 prongs and what have you, that was clearly what their intent was, and it didn't work out. And then they have not been able to gain much ground from what they had in the Donbass area after 3 years of pretty brutal combat in which they've suffered extensive losses. And so I think he does have a weak hand, and we'll see. I think he wants some kind of a settlement a little bit more than he's showing. He's a very good chess player. You notice that all this talk that's gone on with the new administration and what happened last Friday and what have you, there are spokespersons that have had comments in Russia, but Putin hasn't said a word yet. So we'll see how it goes over the next a few weeks. I think it'll be an interesting time. I think we will find a way to get some kind of a discussion going. I also very much respect our courageous Ukrainian friends, and they have been stabbed in the back so many times by the U.S., particularly the Budapest Memorandum of 1994, when we convinced them to divest themselves of their nuclear weapons. And one could certainly make the argument, if we hadn't done that, what happened to them in February of 2022 wouldn't have happened to them. And also, if this doesn't end on a more favorable outcome for Ukraine, I think the message there will be the significant proliferation of nuclear powers in the world. The message will be, if you don't have them, get them, and if you have them, don't ever give them up. I think we'll see how this plays out, but a very, very good question of how strong Russia is right at the moment.
This is a toss-up question. Europe is sitting on $200 billion worth of frozen Russian assets. What's keeping Europe from using the money to help rebuild Ukraine?
I don't really have an answer to that right now. There's still discussions ongoing. So I have to pass on that question.
I think that's a great question, and I'm hopeful that these discussions that are taking place, we also hold some of those assets. And I would agree, I think you were advocating why not use that and to help fund the war effort for Ukraine. And I'd like to see that happen. I guess there are some counter arguments to it, but it seems to me that the viciousness in the way that this attack took place, I think would be supported by most of the world if that were to take place.
Hi, my name is Andrea Hester. As I'm sure you're well aware, at the recent Munich Security Conference, Vice President J.D. Vance lectured European leaders on the fact that they've been putting a cordon sanitaire, as they say, around some extreme right-wing parties in European countries, including Germany, Austria, France, places like that. So my question is, how strong is that cordon sanitaire? Is it likely to crumble in the future? And in Germany, as we just saw with the election and the Alternative for Germany doing so well, how likely is it that the AfD will be in the chancellery in years to come? Thank you.
I'll take that answer. Of course, ultimately, it's up to the voters. So Germany is a democracy, and voters vote for whatever party they prefer. And we have seen an increase in the votes going to the AfD, both sort of at federal level, and if you look more closely at vote distribution within Germany, in all the German federal states that are sort of in the former eastern part of Germany, the AfD came out strongest. So you could say that there is a trend, but I wouldn't necessarily agree. And at the moment, there is a firm consensus among all the parties of what we call the Democratic Center not to cooperate with the AfD. There had been some debate about that issue before the elections, but the candidate for chancellor from the Christian Democratic Party, Friedrich Merz, has made it very clear before the elections, and it will also remain valid after the elections, that there will be no formal cooperation and no cooperation with the AfD. So for the time being, I very confidently can say that this scenario is not going to happen. I can't predict the future. But we have good reasons for this policy. So.
Hi, Chris Barr, new member from Yarmouth. I'd like to ask about the role you see energy security playing in this new situation in which we find ourselves. How are European states in general, and Germany in particular, thinking about sourcing non-Russian energy, especially in the wake of the Gaza conflict, which has kind of shown how easily the Red Sea can be shut off for energy shipments from the Middle East? Thank you.
Well, one of the most immediate impacts of Russia's invasion of Ukraine was that Germany suddenly had a massive problem with our energy supply because we had been mostly dependent on the import of gas from Russia through pipelines. And we had to stop that for political reasons. We also had to stop that because the pipeline blew up. So we also sort of simply physically we can't import that gas anymore. There are other member states of the European Union that still import energy from Russia, Hungary among them. But for us, we have taken a very conscious decision to decouple ourselves from energy supply from Russia. And there's also no appetite to reverse that course. One of the answers that Germany this created a massive challenge for us, and there was energy prices reached a temporary high, and we were really scrambling to replace this Russian gas with other sources of energy. We entered into contracts with other partners also in the European neighborhood. We built our first ever LNG terminal that now allows us to import LNG, and I think 85% of that comes from the US. But we've also invested massively in and have sped up our investment in renewable energy. That has been very successful. Now we're probably going to have a new government. I can't predict whether there will be any changes in that part of our energy policy, but as I said, there is no appetite in the US, in Germany, to go back to sort of getting our energy from Russia.
But the petroleum products are fungible products, and just the price of oil, it's somewhere between $80 and $100 a barrel. It's been relatively stable, and I think the producers, of course, they always want it to go higher, but they aren't going to increase their capacity production to let it so that the market drops. And so that much oil, that much petroleum is being produced around the world, and it seems to move and get to where it needs to go. Russian product is now going more to Asia. India is buying it, and what have you, and Europe has had to go to other sources. But I think the world's producers of petroleum will produce enough to keep a profitable but pretty stable price, and we have the capacity to move it around, keep everybody's industry going reasonably well. There will be disruptions, and there'll be some changes that have to be made, but I think we can solve that problem.
We've got a point here.
Hi, I'm Eva from Portland, and originally I am from Czech Republic, so we did have our experience with the Russians. And my question is about the new European security. If you think we're going to see in Europe more nuclear weapons proliferation, or if some states will be thinking of maybe getting nuclear weapons, and I don't know if you can answer that and what the process will be.
I can't answer your question right now. I've also seen reports of France making overtures to sort of extend the nuclear deterrence umbrella of France. There are currently so many discussions going on in Europe on these issues, and I can't predict them, and even if I knew what they were, I would probably not be allowed to talk about it. But many things that have been deemed unthinkable in the past are actually currently debated.
Yeah, I think the proliferation issue, particularly if things end badly for Ukraine, I'm thinking more perimeter. Turkey would be one possibility. If Iran goes nuclear, I think you can expect Saudi Arabia to do that. If the credibility of U.S. support to our Asian allies deteriorates, I don't think it'd be long before Japan and South Korea have to make these considerations. So I think the proliferation issue is very real, but I don't think it's that much a focus in certainly among the NATO members of NATO, except possibly, I would say, Turkey. And of course, if Turkey gets it, then that brings issues with Greece and other countries in that area. So it's an outcome that we don't want to see happen.
I'd like to throw another aspect of proliferation into the mix. I mentioned at the beginning that I have worked a lot on Africa policy, and back then we were very closely looking at sort of what the Wagner group, so Russian mercenaries all across Africa, were doing. A while ago, I read a really interesting piece about the risk of proliferation in case Ukraine loses this war and the Ukraine military is disbanded, because this is actually one of the best trained militaries that we currently have in Europe. And they have capabilities, and they will have to look for other ways of using their capabilities. So this could also actually, again, create a new proliferation risk with mercenaries being hired all over the world from Ukraine. And that's also not a development that we would like to see.
I think just a sort of a tangential issue that you brought up, what Ukraine has learned during this 3-year war, it's been incredible. And they're producing domestically now roughly 40% of what they're using. And I think the nature of war has changed profoundly, and the speed of war. And daily it changes. They're having to rewrite their software. They've developed incredible capabilities using drones, expendable drones. So the big, hardware, tanks, aircraft, ships, aircraft carriers, and what have you. I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned there for NATO and for everybody in the world. The more hybrid kinds of war and what we call left of bang that have to do with cyber and electronic warfare and other means of warfare, public, misinformation, that in that whole domain, which we're not very good at, but some of our friends are very, very good at. And so I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned here. And I think it'll be very helpful to all of us to pay some close attention to the capabilities that Ukraine has developed and how they've adapted in a time of great need when their national survival is at stake. You can become pretty creative and pretty adaptable, and they've certainly done that.
My name is Sven. Just a quick question about, there was a mention of 72 oil tankers from Russia floating around, and they were going through the Danish channels, and there were discussions about blockading or stopping those tankers. A lot of them are unsafe, and so wondering if there was any new development.
I don't know of any new developments, but I share your concern. The so-called Black Fleet, ships from nowhere, single-hulled, old ships, and a lot of Russian oil is being transported on them. Again, not knowing a whole lot about it, I would think there would be more that we could do to stop that. Just if nothing else, from the potential environmental disasters and what have you, outlawing the transport of any kind of petroleum and anything that's a single hull ship anymore. But that takes some political will, and right now we don't seem to have the means to be able to do that.
Well, there's another dimension to it. In Germany, we call this the Schattenflotte, so the shadow fleet. And beyond the fact that they're sort of trying to break sanctions that were levied against Russia, we've also seen an increase in attacks on critical infrastructure in the Baltic Sea. So communication and power lines were being broken, and neighboring states are now trying to increase surveillance of the shipping lines across the Baltic Sea in the hope of preventing such attacks. But that again just proves the fact that Germany and Europe are prime target of Russian. So we are in a hybrid war with Russia right now, and we are prime target of their attacks on all different areas, from misinformation to attacks on critical infrastructure.
We got time. Go ahead.
A good point that you just made, and I think one of the big differences, and a psychological thing that I think NATO and the West has to come to terms with, is that in reality, Russia is at war with NATO now, and they're on a war footing, their economy's on a war footing, and what have you. And I think it's time that we have to realize that we're in a war with Russia, and approach it from that perspective, and psychologically making that case. And there was a good paper that just came out by the Atlantic Council, a NATO strategy for countering Russia. And that's probably the main point in that article, is come to face with these terms. And since the Madrid summit, I guess in 1992, where the first time we said that the primary threat to NATO is Russia, and we've reinforced that at the summit in Washington, D.C., celebrating the 75th anniversary of NATO last year in 2024. And so I think we need to take that seriously, and that's all part of building our deterrence and become a credible deterrent, and this demonstrating the political will to take the appropriate actions.
We're going to have time to sneak in one last question. Those of you who I didn't get to, forgive me, but I'm going to go here to our great IVLP dinner host, Mr. Rapture.
Thank you. Bruce Rapture, and South Portland, and a member for a couple of years. I'm wondering where the money comes from to get European military contractors up and rolling. I mean, it seems almost like there's going to have to be a Manhattan Project level of organization to get these industries rolling again. Sounds as though you're somewhat confident that that process has begun, but I'm just wondering how that overarching, idea will happen.
Well, we definitely have a task ahead of us, and if you look more closely at the defense industry in Europe, it's also very fragmented. That's always been one of the challenges. So we suffer from the fact that I don't have the numbers at hand, but whilst in the US you may have two different standards for the same weapon, in Europe we have 17 or 20. So our defense industry is still very much organized along national lines, with a lot of sort of nation states enviously guarding their defense industry, and this has to change. At the European Special Council that's going to meet tomorrow, I think they will also discuss ways of getting out of this conundrum. There have been proposals emanating from the European Commission over the last years, sort of trying to steer European member states towards that, also providing EU funds for common, for joint procurement, just pooling procurement volumes from different member states in the hopes of streamlining processes. So this is homework that needs to be done. And then, of course, also, if you look a bit more broadly, I'm now speaking for Germany. Germany has always tried to keep quite some distance to our defense industry. And that sort of is rooted in our history, and it's rooted in our sort of, we try to keep our distance from everything that was involved the military. I myself grew up in a family, I don't have any relatives who have ever served in the military. I recently spoke about that with my parents. They don't even know anybody who has served or is actively serving. And I'm not, as a diplomat, sort of, I work in security policy, and I tell them, well, this is really important. And I think we also have a task ahead as a society to remind people that defense is a very natural part of a democratic society. And also German politicians have been trying to keep our defense industry at arm's length. There was also, I think, I read this press statement by Ursula von der Leyen explaining what she's going to present tomorrow at the summit, and there's also mention of the fact that in the future the European Investment Bank should be allowed to mobilize capital for defense. It's currently sort of the European Investment Bank cannot lend for defense purposes. We also do not have any cooperation in Germany between universities and our defense industry. It's just, universities don't want it. And I work a lot with MIT, and if you look at the history of how US technology leadership came about, it was often kickstarted by defense research and development. So I think we have some homework to do. We had good reasons for how we handled this in the past. I mean, we're also the country that started 2 world wars, so we had our good reasons, but I think things have to change.
Admiral Johnson, any last words?
No, yeah, I would like to thank, I don't know how many people are there, but all of you who showed up tonight and showed an interest in, I think, a very important topic. Thank you. And appreciate your membership in the World Affairs Council of Maine. They have wonderful programs. And this whole series of lectures that we've had over the last month. And Allison and her team and the board are doing wonderful work. And as I think one of the questions earlier about public diplomacy and keeping this helping to educate people why this is important, that's what the World Affairs Council of Maine is doing. So thank you all for being out on this Wednesday evening. I don't know what your alternatives were, but I'm glad you made the choice that you made. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I want to, of course, thank Admiral Johnson. I want to thank Dr. Kreibigh. I want to thank Admiral Johnson for remembering that he always has one job when he comes to talk, and that's to remind everyone about membership in the World Affairs Council of Maine and how important that is, especially now. We had a question about, or a comment about facts with NATO spending. I'm sure that Mr. Kendall just didn't see last week's 7 and 7, where in our infographic of the week we had actually spelled out the NATO spending from 2013 through today. These are the kinds of things that we do. I also want to comment on the importance of public diplomacy and to ask all of you who care about public diplomacy, who care about our ability to build relationships and create alliances around the world, to sort of think about what you can do to ask and make sure that these programs continue. We, as the World Affairs Council of Maine, are the only organization in the state who are authorized to do this amazing program called the International Visitor Leadership Program. We brought over 100 emerging leaders to Maine last year. We have some flyers about it on the way out. And the reason I'm bringing this up now is I spent last week in Washington trying to make sure that that program continues, along with every other federally funded exchange program, whether that's the Fulbright, the critical language area scholarships, whether that is the Stevens program. I'm sure I'm forgetting some, but all of these opportunities, art diplomacy, sports diplomacy through the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, that send Americans around the world as ambassadors, as citizen diplomats, and then bring people here. Those programs, like so many other wonderful things that our government is doing, is under threat. It will impact the future of this organization, and so I just want to raise that to everyone's attention and thank you all for caring about our engagement in the world, and thank you for caring about coming out tonight to understand and learn.
Promotional block, and that is we are present on social media. So if you're interested, if you're interested in keeping sort of following political developments in Germany, also following our positions on what's happening in the US, follow us on social media. It's either Germany in Boston on Instagram. We're on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Blue Sky. We're no longer on X. The embassy still is on X, similar hashtag Germany in the US, and they post very, very time sensitive, they post very regularly on these developments. Just follow us, and I think it's a good resource on what's happening.
And we wanted to offer you a little Maine breakfast and some coffee from our global benefactor, Coffee by Design, to say thank you for coming up. Again, thank you to our sponsors. Roger Woodman is over here, Jim and Janet, Bill Hall. I want to thank the board of directors. I want to thank the Portland Media Center that comes and films these so we can rebroadcast them on community TV. I also want to thank the students from Gould Academy who were here, and our University of Southern Maine interns. We are one staff person, and we could not operate without the support of the students at the University of Southern Maine. So thank you, everyone. Our next program is I'm not sure if it's going to be Wednesday or Tuesday now. We're trying to get it nailed down. But in 2 weeks' time, either Tuesday the 18th or Wednesday the 19th, we're going to do a program on Greenland. It's a place that came up tonight, has been in the news, and we have 2 resident experts in Maine who are going to address the questions of Greenland's sovereignty, autonomy, and future. Okay, so thank you. We'll see you there.
All right.